This is the multi-voice text-to-speech podfic reading of Illegal Bum by starling011, composed by Burning Aurora, Kaliana, and Flowerhawk. Sirius glanced up when Remus came in, but turned back to the kids immediately. Teddy was sitting on the couch holding a book loosely as he watched Sirius and Nova. His black hair was carefully combed, similar to how Remus combed his own. Sirius had his dark hair up halfway up in one of Remus's favorite styles. Nova's long, sandy hair had been braided down her back by the patient fingers of Remus this morning.
Try again.
Sirius prompted her, showing her how to position her hand and press on the strings.
I didn't know you could play the guitar,
Remus commented. Teddy looked up, but Nova, in her typical fashion, stayed focused on the task at hand.
You thought I had a guitar for show?
Sirius asked, confused.
You and Da have been together for like 5 ever. How do you not know everything about each other?
Teddy asked curiously. Sirius's cheek twitched with a grin. Teddy was so much like him, it was definitely like looking in a mirror sometimes.
We've been together for 12 years and married for 10. That's not forever, you little goblin.
Remus informed him, sitting on the couch next to the small boy. Teddy shrugged. Maybe at 7 it was considered a long time. He will be turning 8 next week. Nova's birthday 8 months before had made Teddy want a pool party. He was steadfastly ignoring that the weather in August, for Nova's birthday, was much warmer than the weather in early April. Sirius and Remus had tried to convince him to move it indoors and maybe hold off on the pool aspect until summer. Teddy wouldn't budge. Nova had ignored the whole conversation, pressing her fingers carefully to the strings. Sirius turned back to the young girl and adjusted her hand deftly.
The strings hurt,
she told Sirius after playing the sequence he'd been teaching her. Sirius took her hand and kissed the fingertips.
It does in the beginning. If you want to learn to play, we can get you a smaller guitar, easier to hold, and the strings would be a little gentler. Eventually, you will develop calluses, or just decide it's not worth it.
Sirius eased his fingers over hers, working out the soreness. He took the guitar and set it aside.
I never really thought about it. I enjoy learning piano.
Nova stretched out her fingers.
I kind of like the fact that it doesn't hurt, generally.
It was clear why she amended her statement. Occasionally she complained that her fingers were sore after a long practice, or that the stretching was uncomfortable. Sirius nodded. Nova stood and stretched.
I have some homework to finish. Call me for dinner,
she requested. She pressed a kiss to Sirius's cheek and then Remus's. She ruffled Teddy's hair, getting a squawk before skipping up the stairs humming.
So you really know how to play the guitar?
Remus asked, even as Teddy curled up under his arm, reading. Sirius picked up the instrument, adjusted the strings again, and strummed easily. It wasn't a song anyone would recognize. It was one he had made up simply because he liked the way the notes all flowed together. Remus was looking at him with that look, and Sirius gave him a coy smile.
Hey, cub, you want to help me make dinner?
Sirius asked, setting the instrument carefully on its stand. Teddy immediately tucked his bookmark into the pages of the book he was reading and stood. Sirius led him into the kitchen and tied an apron around his thin form. Sleeves were rolled up, and Sirius showed Teddy how to wash his hands again. Afterwards, he stood next to Teddy. He rinsed the potatoes that Teddy then peeled, and he would take them back to slice them. Soon enough, Sirius had a few pans on the stove with various things cooking. He handed Teddy a wooden spoon to look after the boiling water and the pasta. Remus moved further into the kitchen to keep a direct eye on the small child as Sirius worked on the rest of dinner. Teddy told Remus all about the book he was reading and how his own writing project was coming. Sirius had been thrilled when Teddy had watched him for several days working on a book and asked what it was about. When Teddy had asked how someone became a writer, the answer had been simple.
You become a writer by wanting to be a writer.
Sirius had pulled the boy onto his lap and opened a new document.
Do you have something to write about?
Remus had watched as Teddy hesitantly reached for the keyboard and started to type. After 20 minutes, he had relaxed. Sirius replaced his lap with a stack of books and left their budding author to it. Since then, Teddy had covered everything he could in words. Notebooks, margins of homework, and the stationary computer in the office usually betrayed the noises of creativity. Remus nodded along and asked after characters. He also inquired about the plot and arcs. He was careful not to suggest anything. Sirius knew Remus believed in the authenticity of the creative process. Once dinner was finished, Sirius sent Teddy to go collect his sister.
A laptop for the boy and a guitar for the girl. Your children are expensive.
Remus teased, mentioning the birthday presents for the children. Sirius grinned, leaning into his hold.
I'm obscenely rich. Of course, my children would have expensive taste.
Sirius answered, inhaling the lovely laundry scent of his husband, and could smell the lingering scent of Teddy's sage soap. Remus kissed his neck and helped Sirius move all the dishes to the dining room table. Food was passed around, with the adults helping the children dish up food and pour milk. Teddy continued to entertain them with stories about his book, and eventually Remus brought the topic around to school, asking after homework. Nova had finished most things, though she was still slogging through maths. Teddy offered to help her after dinner. They were so sweet to each other. Sirius sent the kids up to finish up homework while he and Remus cleaned up the kitchen. Sirius closed the dishwasher and arms slipped around him. Lips brushed his neck.
Absolutely not. I need to get something down on paper before Dorcas comes down from London to kick my ass.
Sirius didn't make any attempt to pull away.
You're right. I will go look after the kids while you work all studiously like.
Remus pulled away with a soft kiss to his ear with a light laugh. Sirius wanted to pout, but knew he should take the momentary reprieve. He didn't like to try and work when the kids were about. It meant he only had school hours and the evening hours before bedtime to work. Sirius washed his hands and moved over to the laptop. He sat in the window seat and Padfoot jumped up to rest on his feet like a big fuzzy heavy blanket. Sirius would reach down to pat him occasionally.
Come up and say good night.
Remus got his attention. Sirius immediately abandoned his laptop. Padfoot trotted behind him as he made his way upstairs. Nova and Teddy looked very sleepy in their beds. Sirius made his way over and kissed Nova's forehead. She smelled like lavender and her sandy hair was damp from her shower. He tucked the blanket around her shoulders. He moved over and kissed Teddy's forehead once again, smelling that familiar sage scent. He picked up the book that would have been voted on and bickered over for the nightly reading. They were starting a new book tonight. Neither Nova nor Teddy had the patience for thin children's books. They never had. In the early days, Remus and Sirius had read poetry. Now that both children were reading at a high level, they had switched to chapter books, usually reading a chapter before bed. Sirius walked them through the first chapter of the new book, pitching his voice and falling into a cadence that would help them wind down. By the time he reached the end of the chapter, Teddy's eyes were drooping. Nova was holding her purple bat stuffy, eyes glassy.
Good night, loves.
Sirius murmured. He dropped another kiss on each forehead and gave them each a tight hug. Remus did the same and made sure to check under their beds for monsters.
No monsters under there. I promise, baby.
He reassured Teddy, who was looking anxious. Kid had definitely inherited Sirius's high-strung nature. Nova was much more laid-back like Remus. She was constantly looking after Teddy. Sirius turned on the nightlight and left the door cracked so they could see the nightlight in the hallway on the way to the bathroom.
I'm going to let Pads out for a bit.
Sirius told Remus as he collected his journal.
I'll run you a bath.
Remus promised. Sirius came around and kissed him softly.
Just remember, every perfect bath requires one thing.
Sirius reminded him. Remus's lips quirked up, already knowing the answer, but he gestured for Sirius to continue.
My husband.
He made his way back downstairs to let the excitable dog out. He tossed the tennis ball, even as he wrote in the journal. Most days with his family were easy. Very few of his early triggers and issues were even present these days. But sometimes when he saw that familiar shadow in his son's eyes, the old anxieties came up. He was messing up. He had messed up his kid. Teddy was going to go through life facing the same challenges. It would be all Sirius's fault when he ended up damaged. It was easy to see Nova was strong-willed and independent. If he believed the latest bullshit Tom Riddle's followers were trying to push, he would think she was going to grow up into an alpha. That kind of thinking was an insult to his fiery, red-headed beta best friend, his gentle alpha husband, his own stubborn omega streak, and the strong, independent omega currently raising his niece with his loving, caring alpha brother. It was an insult to the strong man who made him breakfast most mornings. The hogshead even expanded to include a family-friendly area, as the number of children had by the regulars exploded. Nova seldomly needed looking after, always running along ahead and rarely looking back. Teddy was the more reticent child, clinging to their hands and walking hesitantly and looking back all the time. Sirius worried that he had projected too much of himself on the child. He never wanted Teddy to inherit his anxious nature. These thoughts all went in the journal, and he was sure Minerva wouldn't hesitate to set him straight. Hell, if he brought it up with Remus, he would likely get the answer he wanted tonight, but he couldn't. Remus's comfort, while always genuine and loving, was coming from his husband, someone who loved him and was biased. Minerva would tell him straight up if he was doing something to damage his kids. No sugar. He needed that assurance, as shallow as he was. He also knew he was leagues better. He could put it down on the paper and know he was being ridiculous. He could put it down on paper and practically visualize Minerva's response. He didn't have to spiral over it right then and there, and part of his brain, the part that often spoke to him in Remus's voice, told him he was being silly. Finally, Padfoot plopped down next to him, exhausted. Sirius led him back inside and cleaned off his paws and snout with the dog-safe wipes just inside the door. They both walked up the stairs, and Padfoot wandered into the kids' room. He sniffed at both of them before lying down in the dog bed in the corner. Remus and Sirius had tried to keep Padfoot from sleeping with the children, not wanting the small shared room to feel crowded, but it had been a losing battle. Sirius peeked briefly in. Mooney was curled up against Teddy's chest fast asleep, her tail wrapped over the small boy. Nova, in typical fashion, had kicked her blankets to the floor and was lying partially off the bed. Sirius stepped in and lifted her head back onto the pillows and adjusted the blanket over her form. He collected a pair of small socks off the floor, tossing them idly into the hamper. He said goodnight to Padfoot and headed back to bed. The bathroom door was cracked and the flickering light told Sirius it was lit by candles. He made sure the bedroom door was closed and let himself into the warm bathroom. He was right. Candles flickered on the counter, casting the room in a low, warm light. Remus was lounging in the bathtub, bubbles stacked up to his shoulders. Sirius felt his heart settle a little bit. He shed his clothes, and when he came over to the edge of the tub, a large tan hand popped out of the bubbles. He stepped carefully into the tub, and Remus's arms went around him as warm lips touched his shoulder.
Hi.
Remus murmured, brushing his hair back. Sirius leaned back on his shoulder.
Hi.
He responded, and their lips met softly. They lounged in the tub, lazily kissing and relaxing. They didn't need words between them after having been together for so long. Remus let the hot water and lavender relax his muscles. Sirius let the warm water and his husband help him unwind from a long day.
You meeting your goals?
Remus asked when Sirius finally stood up and headed for the shower. He never liked using a bath to get clean, something about it feeling like Sirius soup. He always took a shower afterwards.
Sort of.
Sirius answered, checking the temperature of the shower and stepping into the heavy stream of water. It soaked his hair immediately. Remus drained the tub and joined Sirius.
Coffeehouse romance is fun, but seeing as I never had the longing looks over the espresso press, I'm writing a little blind.
You could ask Tonks. Honestly, woman has a new flame every week. It's not that large of a town.
Remus tutted a little like a disapproving mum. Sirius smiled at his own thoughts but didn't enlighten Remus.
She doesn't meet the girls at the Three Broomsticks. She meets them at the clubs in London and invites them back for a weekend in a rustic small town.
Sirius informed him, lathering up his dark locks.
Not helpful at all.
Remus shrugged, letting go of whatever point he was trying to make.
Doesn't matter if the longing looks over the milk steamer and accidental touches while handing over change that then is tipped easily into the conspicuous tip jar is almost over. Now I have to decide the spice level.
Sirius informed him. Remus's hands paused on his hair.
I could break away from being an erotica writer. I'm older and have 2 children. I really should be moving toward the more respectable closed door. Dorcas is expecting her first child. I should not be sending an expectant mother gay smut. Might be time to grow up.
Remus gave him an unconvinced look now. Sirius gave him an innocent smile. Then Remus was hauling him close.
What could be more adult than what I want to do to you right now?
Remus asked in a low growl against Sirius's ear. Sirius laughed, wrapping his arms around Remus. Their lips brushed together, slick and warm tongues tangling easily.
Want to go to bed?
Sirius informed him. Remus sighed and stepped back. The wash was quick, and Remus grabbed Sirius as soon as he was dry and hauled him to bed. Sirius laughed delightedly as he was practically carried out of the bathroom and dropped like a sack of potatoes on the mattress. He leaned up on his elbows as Remus made sure the bedroom door was locked. Then his husband stalked back to the bed with dark eyes and a hard cock. Sirius giggled in a truly scandalized fashion when Remus growled and practically leapt onto him. When their lips met, it was with a smile. Sirius felt Remus's warm hands twine with his and offered only a tiny bit of resistance when Remus went to haul them over his head. He waggled his eyebrows when Remus gave him a look. Then, in a show of strength, Sirius's arms were pinned over his head, and Remus was leaving a dark bruise on his neck, a mark he would never be able to adequately cover with makeup. Lily was going to poke fun at him forever. Still, the lovely pings of pain had him twitching. Remus could feel it, and gave him a rakish smile. Sirius kept his hands over his head, even when Remus released him. It wasn't even something Remus asked for, and he knew they would be in that sandy hair soon, but they both enjoyed the temporary surrender. Remus started the trip down Sirius's body, covering him in kisses and occasionally swirling his tongue around a tattoo or over his nipples. His fingers found the silver hoop and tugged lightly as his mouth continued down. Sirius could do little else but cling to the bedclothes and let Remus pull him apart. Movement caught his eye, and he automatically turned toward the large mirror recently installed over their dresser. Somehow, even in the dim light of the room, they were clearly displayed there. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the scene as Remus's strong arms looped under his legs and pulled them up. Sirius could smell slick flowing from his own body and heard the gratifying groan from Remus, right before lips wrapped around his cock and tucked a finger into Sirius's body. Sirius groaned as talented fingers and a tongue pulled him apart. He would never tire of the thorough way Remus loved him. 2 fingers sank into his body, and a moment later he felt the added help from the synthetic lube. It was lovely, and he was sure he had died and gone to heaven. Remus continued to work him open until Sirius was sliding down on 3 fingers easily. Remus pulled off the heavy cock with a soft pop. He sat up slightly. Sirius smiled when Remus's eyes followed where his were trained and saw what Sirius was looking at. They both looked flushed with sweat beading on their skin and lust making their eyes dark. He could see Remus's arousal, slick with lube and his hand working it over. Fuck, Sirius had dreams about those hands. So gentle and caring, but also strong and lovely. His own arms moved from above his head to rest on Remus's shoulders.
Hold your legs. I want to drive into you, so deep you feel me in your throat.
Remus's voice was soft. Even after all this time, he was conscious enough to not let his alpha dominate Sirius. Sirius was free to tell him to take a flying leap. Instead, he wrapped his arms around his thighs, demonstrating his strength and flexibility, thank you yoga, and pulled his legs back until his knees were practically touching his chest. Remus grinned and gripped Sirius's chin, turning him back to the mirror.
Want you to watch us in the mirror, Omega.
Remus informed him in a low voice. Sirius shuddered at the tone, but never once did that awful panic come up. In this room, in this space with Remus, he was perfectly safe. Sirius's toes curled and his eyes would have rolled back if not for his desire to keep his eyes on the hot scene. He admired the long, lean form of Remus over and pressing into him. He could feel every inch. He could see it sinking into him, splitting him open. It was so fucking sexy. He was ready to implode or die. He felt like they were both equally viable and not at all dramatic options. And then Remus was buried fully. How was that even possible? Sirius was not a large man, and in comparison to Remus was almost painfully slight. Where did that massive log even go? Did Sirius have a bag of holding in his bum? Remus winked at him and lips brushed his ear, then his neck, and over the long-healed mating mark on his shoulder.
You feel so good, Carrie-Anne.
Remus informed him, hot breath washing over Sirius's overheated skin. The air was thick with the smell of coffee, chocolate, laundry, and leather, with the slightest hint of the electric storm behind everything. It gave the air an almost impeccable charge. Sirius gasped when lips touched skin or drops of sweat landed on him. Every nerve was firing with pleasure as Remus moved against him. He wanted to cry, maybe scream and explode. It was so good, Remus's mouth on his body, that lovely cock working into him, those dark eyes burning into him from the reflective surface of the mirror, hips punching deeply and filling him so perfectly. Remus was made to love Sirius, and Sirius was made to love Remus. It may have taken time and a few bad relationships, but they had found each other. Tan hands tangled in dark hair and tugged. Slick made their bodies slide together easily. Sirius's arms were still wrapped around his legs, but sweat built between his limbs, making his flesh all the damper. His toes curled with every thrust inward. Remus was driving into him, and Sirius couldn't stand it anymore. He threw his head back against their pillows and gave himself over to the sensations. He could still imagine how they looked in the mirror, straining together. He could feel peridot eyes burning his skin as they took in his expressions greedily. Lips found his, harsh and demanding. He immediately surrendered to Remus. A tongue was in his mouth, plundering greedily, teeth caught briefly over his bottom lip. Remus pulled back from the kiss and placed his hands on Sirius's feet, pushing back. Sirius gasped, eyes flying open. Remus held his gaze and thrust. It was hard and it hurt in the best way as his thighs burned. His toes curled against Remus's fingers. Every thrust inward drove Sirius into the headboard and was right against Sirius's prostate. Tears spilled onto hot cheeks, and Sirius clung to his own thighs as the sound of skin on skin filled the room. The smell of sex and desire mixing deliciously with their own scents. The air was humid, and Sirius could feel his lungs struggling to pull it in. His heart was pounding, providing the bright red flush to his cheeks and down his neck over his collarbones. Remus never relented in his deep, harsh thrusts. Sirius freed one hand from his redundant hold and wrapped his hand around his cock.
Yes, Sirius. Show me how good I make you feel.
Remus growled. It was a low tone that had every hair on Sirius's body stand on end. His gentle husband was currently subsumed by what Sirius fondly called his werewolf. Usually, he only saw this side during their rut heat. Sometimes it came out when something happened to Sirius, like the stalker that had tried to pull Sirius in for a kiss and grope last year. It hadn't been Remus who had decked him, though. Sirius still had pain in his index finger where he had cracked the knuckle. Still, that night being reclaimed by Remus had led to Sirius canceling an event that had him sitting the next day.
Come on, baby, fill me up.
Sirius groaned, his hand moving over his hard flesh in quick movements, matching the way his husband filled him up. The bed thumped against the wall, and the low growl from Remus was nothing short of feral. Sirius had to cover his mouth with his hand as the thrusts redoubled. If not for Remus practically forcing him down into the mattress, he was sure they would be against the wall. Remus leaned down, and Sirius moved his hand so Remus could swallow his sounds. Then the knot caught, and Sirius screamed against Remus as he came across his own hand. More tears spilled out when Remus released one leg to cover his mouth himself. Sirius kept stroking, forcing more out of himself in every pass, while Remus thrust harshly into him, forcing the knot deep as it swelled and locked them together. Sirius could feel Remus filling him so deliciously. They didn't often lock together like this outside of a heat. Sirius still had some issues with the abuse he had suffered. Still, it was never a requirement with Remus. During their annual 1 year, Sirius had panicked right before the knot locked, and in that moment, Remus had pulled back and out. Sirius had been amazed at the self-control of Remus. He was spiking as an alpha, about to claim his omega at their haziest and most out of control. But he had felt Sirius's weak struggle, seen gray eyes shining with panicked tears and the softest choked out.
No.
They had eyed each other from across the room for several long moments. Sirius shivering with the blankets he'd pulled hastily to cover himself, and Remus with his hands shaking as they clenched into fists. Remus had regained control first, and in a feat of strength Sirius would have deemed impossible, had gathered Sirius into his arms and held him until the fear had faded. They had no issues with trust now. Sirius felt every muscle in his body turn to jelly as he finished spurting across his own hand and stomach. Remus's lips felt cool against his ankle. He slowly opened his eyes and looked up at Remus.
You cursed.
Sirius informed him as gentle hands let go of his legs and massaged when Sirius hissed at the pain in his muscles.
You're impossible.
Remus retorted, adjusting them carefully until they were lying on the bed. His hands and lips were cool as Sirius shuddered and came down from his high. They shared many kisses and touches until Remus managed to ease out of Sirius's body.
Mind explaining why you practically mauled me?
Sirius asked when Remus came back to bed with a damp rag. He passed it to Sirius with a pair of joggers and went to unlock the door in case one of the kids needed them.
You didn't seem to be complaining.
Remus pointed out while Sirius cleaned up and dressed.
It was that bloody guitar. With your hair up and everything, you looked like a gosh darn rock star, combined with the photo shoot yesterday. And I was reminded my husband is a fine-looking man with the bum too tight to be legal.
Sirius grinned, tossing the rag into the hamper. He climbed under the covers. Tan arms caught him and he was spooned against Remus.
It was nice. Makes me glad I stopped birth control in preparation for my next heat.
Sirius murmured. He took birth control even with wonky hormone levels, just to avoid another Teddy surprise. But this time, he wanted to try for number 3. Poppy was helping with hormone injections.
Jesus Christ. I can't do you again tonight. We will both die.
Remus shuddered.
You shouldn't take the Lord's name in vain. Just call me Sirius. Also, we don't do it. We make love. Your rule.
Sirius reminded, snuggling into Remus, and got a low grumble.
Get some rest, love. The gremlins will be up shortly.